Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we'll discover what would have happened had Kit Fisto been the Chosen One. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of the Pente team. Want a chance to win in our next giveaway? Watch it at the end of the video and I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins inside of the Jedi Temple in the year 75 BBY. A young Natalin is welcomed into the Jedi Temple. He was born with an exceptionally high midichlorian count and brought to the Jedi Temple by his uncle. Luckily for Fisto, his mother's brother was already a Jedi, which allowed for Fisto to be noticed and brought to the Jedi Order at an early age. The young Kit Fisto was immediately put on the radar of the Jedi Council, a young boy with a midichlorian count higher than that of Master Yoda. The Jedi Council would group up together and discuss the future of this boy. Opo Rancis, the current leader and master of the Order, suggested everyone in the High Council take out their mobile devices and download Raid Shadow Legends. R2 told Anakin to forget about the Battle of Naboo to try this awesome game. Anakin never heard of Raid, so he listened in. If you thought taking down a droid control ship was hard, then you haven't faced the Doom Tower. To beat the Doom Tower, one needs to amass an army of champions. Sure, the regular Doom Tower levels are easy, but the boss battles are more difficult than getting Mace Windu's approval.
Take a seat.
Even more than the Doom Tower, Raid just released Awakening. It's a brutal new dungeon, the Iron Twin Fortresses. If you're able and good enough to take down the Iron Twins, you'll be in for a huge payoff that allows you to awaken your champions. It's like finding out you're the Jedi's chosen one. Correct, there is more R2. A legendary new version of everyone's favorite character and champion has just been released, Ultimate Death Knight. This makes Vader look weak. What? Ultimate Death Knight is everything we hope for in a champion. Powerful, poised, and everyone can get him for free. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and October 27th. There's never been a better time to join Sky Guy and R2-D2 on Raid Shadow Legends. If you use DK Rise's promo code, you'll get a bunch of free items to instantly level up your new champion all the way to level 50. If you haven't started playing Raid, click my link in the description or scan the QR code and you'll get up to $30 in bonuses. The free epic champion Rector Drath, 200,000 silver, an energy refill and an XP boost, and one ancient shard to summon more awesome champions once you get into the game. So click the link in the description or scan the QR code and join PPSW, Sky Guy, and R2-D2. We'll be waiting for you. R2, say thank you to Raid for sponsoring this video. They suggested that Kit Fisto be trained by one of the council members. Grandmaster Yoda agreed. The council was elite at this moment, and filled with incredible Jedi Masters, but the question is, which one of them would take care of the young Jedi? For now, there would be at least 10 years until Fisto become a Jedi Padawan, though from the corner of the room, Master Even Peel suggested that one of the council members take a hold of Fisto earlier than that age of a Padawan and guide him through basic instruction. Yaddle asked who should be in charge of that. It was very uncommon for a Jedi youngling to be taken one-on-one by a master. Most of the Jedi Masters didn't teach younglings. That was left for specific instructors, including one of them being Master Yoda, though Yoda thought that this was the end of training his last student in Dooku. Yoda had no intention of training any other students. He was approaching 900 years old, and with such an amazing life, how could he want to train another rambunctious child one-on-one? He had no issue training classes, but one-on-one was much different. From the other side of the room, Plo Koon suggested that the eldest members of the council should take a hold of Kit Fisto into their own. Yaddle asked what he meant, and Plo Koon spoke up, saying that Oppo, Yarel, Yaddle, Even, Yoda, and himself should be the main instructors of Kit Fisto until he became the age of becoming a Padawan. Yaddle asked who would teach him. Plo Koon suggested that the teacher who bonds most with Kit should be allowed to teach him through his Padawan years. This seemed like a good plan. Both Yoda and Oppo agreed with the notion, which in most cases, if the Master of the Order and the Grand Master agreed, it would probably happen. Until then, the 6 Jedi Masters would then begin to divide the early training up amongst themselves. It would simply have to fit in with their schedules. Council members were usually the busiest members in the Order after all. And with the Jedi getting closer to the Galactic Republic since the end of the High Republic era, Council members were beginning to spend time with the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic more and more. It wasn't normal for a Jedi, but it hadn't created a divide within the Order, and at the moment, it wasn't stopping the Order from being effective peacekeepers. Within a couple of days, the 6 council members assigned to Kit Fisto would begin integrating themselves into his life. Fisto was only 3 years old, so he wasn't really fully understanding that the people he was with were council members, But as he learned with the youngling teachers, it was simple instruction, counting, galactic common, teachings of the Force that were very basic. Kit Fisto would eventually grow into a 5-year-old where he began to have a more controlled understanding of what the Force was actually doing. Fisto, from a young age, showed a quick affinity for the Force, but it was his growth into a 5-year-old where his abilities began to show extreme potential. One would assume that would be the case, but sometimes, with extremely high midichlorian counts, it didn't always possess power. Sometimes they were extremely gifted mentally, and that was that. The Council had hoped that Fisto would become greater than Master Yoda, especially since most Natallans lived into their 150s. There was a potential that his stay could see a new era of greatness for the Jedi Order. The beginning of Fisto's training would have each of the 6 Jedi Masters developing their own relationship with the young Chosen One. Though, Fisto and Poof took an immediate liking to one another. Their bond was almost inseparable. Yarel had been one on the Council for a long time, and he had been pushing his 200s at this point. The Jedi Master was also able to be very effective at teaching Kit Fisto. The Council almost entirely decided that it was going to be Yarel that would train the Chosen One. Though there would be an issue when Kit Fisto turned 7. When the young Chosen One turned 7, he lost his affinity for the Force. It hit the Council by surprise. No one expected it to happen. While yes, he had an incredibly high midichlorian count, there was no reason to why Fisto had lost his ability to use the Force, to a great extent. The Council requested Naid Fisto into their chambers, and asked him what they might know about the Natallan Chosen One. Naid told the Council that Kit probably needed to visit a water world. Sometimes a young Natallan would lose their touch with the Force if they were away from water for too long. After all, Natallans lived underwater, and they were always used to being underwater beings. The Council would send Yariel, Naid, Tigli Nesem to the homeworld of the Natallans and bring Kit Fisto with them. Their mission was to get Kit to become more attuned to the Force like he had been before he stopped showing signs of being Force attuned. During the trip through hyperspace, Naid would be able to see firsthand the bond between Yariel and Kit. It was very interesting because they had been attached, and when Kit was... It was very interesting because they had been attached when Kit was just a child. They had a very familial bond, almost like father and son, which in the Order was extremely uncommon for a teacher and a student to have a bond like that, but most students in the Order weren't trained by a master when they were just a youngling. Well, not personally trained like Fisto was, at least. Most younglings were put in the classes and taught with their peers, while Fisto had been one that was trained individually with a teacher and with a council member, all at a different time, of course. When the group eventually got to Glee Slem, they brought Fisto back to his home world, which was in the capital city of the planet. Naid needed to set Yariel up in an aqua suit so that he may accompany the 2 Fistos to their home world. The trip was short, but it saw 3 travel into the depths of water. The sea was dark, but it was then lit up by lights of a massive city. The city was underwater, and it was quite elegant, beautifully designed and bustling with life. As the 3 entered the city gates, they got weird looks and stares, mostly because of Yariel being there. He was extremely tall and not exactly normal looking. Regardless, they had all swarmed to the house of Fisto. It was relatively wealthy of a household. It wasn't like House Sereno, home of Dooku's family though. It wasn't that rich, it was just pretty rich. The 3 entered, and within minutes, Kit was showing signs of being able to use the Force again. But something even more incredible happened. Kit and Yariel's bond, as student and teacher, was completed here. The 2 would find their true bond, and it would be here on Glee Slem where Yariel would understand the true path of which he undertook. Usually he was calm and relaxed as a Jedi Master, but he found a great deal of excitement for training Kit Fisto, especially because the potential of training Fisto would be incredible. The young Jedi had so much ahead of him, and the chances of him growing beyond Master Yoda were incredibly tangible for him. Yariel noticed one other thing about Fisto. He noticed that Fisto's natural ability to use the Force underwater, and he realized that he would have to train Kit Fisto to harmonize with his natural abilities and use them to his knowledge. It made Yariel also realize he had to confront the Jedi Archivist and ask him about Force abilities that consisted of using the Force underwater. When the trio eventually returned to Coruscant after a couple days on Glee and Slam, Yarael Poof had an entire different perspective on how he would approach training Kit Fisto. His new model of training would be for him and for Kit to train under new. His new model of training would be new for him as well. He trained a couple Jedi in his time, but as for a waterborne Jedi, that wasn't something he was used to. The moment Yarael Poof returned to the Jedi Temple, he left Naid and Kit and headed for the Jedi Archives. He was visiting the Archivist to gain information regarding the Force users born from water. The Archivist was accompanied by a young woman. He was teaching her to become the next Jedi Archivist, and her name was Jocasta Nu. Regardless, the current Jedi Archivist was a man by the name of Master Cretin Ram. Yarael asked Master Ram what he could do about the Force and what he knew about how it affected Jedi from Waterworlds, or if there was any information on how to train such beings from Waterworlds. The Jedi Archivist was a bit flustered. He didn't seem to have the proper response, but the young Jocasta Nu was on top of her game as she told Master Poof to follow her. Master Poof nodded to Master Ram as he followed Jocasta into the far side of the archives. She looked at Master Poof and apologized, admitting that Master Ram hadn't been on top of his game lately, and because he wasn't on top of his game, he was causing the archives to fall behind. She admitted she didn't understand how he was even made into becoming the Jedi Archivist, considering he lacked the ability, or the responsibility, or even the intelligence that was required to be an archivist. Yarael looked at Jocasta with confusion, as he nodded, and told Jocasta that he would mention her concerns to the Council. She kind of hit him with all that information out of nowhere, and he really didn't expect it. She apologized for it, and they moved on. Jocasta and Yarael would discover an entire section of the archives that had been brilliantly put together, organized from some of the oldest members the Order ever had to use the Force and intertwine it with their natural ability and affinity for being underwater. It wasn't really a discovery for Jocasta Nu. She was quite brilliant for her age, and she essentially designed the entire Jedi Archives at this point. She was destined to become the next Jedi Archivist anyways, especially if Master Ram couldn't get his grip on intelligence or lack thereof. Jocasta asked Master Poof if there was anything else she could do for him. The Jedi Master shook his head and he thanked her for her time. Jocasta bowed and then turned around and went back to her understudy. Jocasta didn't care much for Cretin Ram. He was an arrogant Jedi with the intelligence of a hungry rancor. He was clumsy and he was stupid, and he didn't represent what it meant to be a Jedi Archivist. Master Ram almost forced Jocasta Nu out of the archives, but she believed the Force guided her to stay within the confines of the Jedi Archives because she thought she could make it better. That would become the truth. Master Yarael Poof would spend hours every day for the next several months scouring the information that the Jedi Archives had to offer in relation to what he needed. If Yarael would train the Chosen One, then he would do it right, and since he was the most likely candidate to do it, then he would be prepared to do it. For the time being, he was still able to split up time with the other council members, but he himself furthered his understanding of aquatic Force users. This didn't disrupt him, nor did it bother him. He saw it as a great honor to be part of such a prolific journey inside of the Jedi Order. Training the Chosen One was a great respect to take on. The council members, who also helped oversee the training of Fisto, saw the massive growth within the student. After he returned home from his homeworld, his growth tripled within only months. His success could be attributed to the council members, but part of it needed to be attributed to him. It was Kit that decided to become a dedicated student. He was never satisfied and he wouldn't ever settle for the bare minimum. As a child, it was incredible because such determination couldn't be taught. It had to come from within. After several more years of training, Kit Fisto would finally be an appropriate age to become a Jedi Padawan. While the council believed that Fisto was ready to become a Padawan at a much younger age, they didn't want to overwhelm him, so the eldest members decided to make him wait until the youngest age possible, 13. When Fisto turned 13, he was an excellent Force user and quite exceptional of a duelist. While of course Kit had many other trials to endure as a Padawan, he was excited to begin the newest part of his journey, especially since he and Master Poof had gotten so close to one another. It was hard for even Kit to deny his excitement. Master Poof had such a time to prepare for a student that once he got him, he immediately took him under his wing, and the two left Coruscant. There were many great things for the two of them to be doing. When Kit was just a Padawan, he in a way knew that Master Poof would cater towards him, and to help him grow. It wasn't a bad way, but it would also provide Fisto with a proper touch of everything he needed to be a successful Jedi. Firstly, the two of them would depart for a water world in the Outer Rim. Kamino was a small blue globe hidden amongst the stars. It was well known in the Jedi archives because it hadn't been deleted or erased. Poof was taking his apprentice to Kamino because the Kaminoans would be able to use him. It was a simple exercise that would allow Fisto to grow while also helping out people that were currently building a colony on the small ocean world. Kit Fisto and Uriel Poof would arrive on the very small, hardly named colony of Tapoka City. The Kaminoans were gleeful when they saw the Jedi. Their mission for the Jedi wasn't extremely difficult, they just required some assistance, saving some members of their colony that were trapped by construction materials that fell into the ocean and landed on top of their vessel while they were welding in the structural implants for the soon-to-be neighboring towers at Tapoka City. It would be mostly cloning facilities for the Kaminoans, since most of their research stations and living quarters were already a part of the main complex. This new structure was incredibly important for future business. Regardless, Fisto undertook the assignment as he looked over at his master and smiled. Uriel asked Kit if he would like assistance as he watched the student take off his robes in the pouring rain. Fisto looked at his master, gave a sly salute, and then stepped off the edge, backwards, like a cocky little hooligan. He fell down into the water and began treading as he sped down to the ocean floor. Visibility in the oceans of Kamino were not well lit. Most oceans were dark, but if you took into account the cities on Naboo that belonged to the Gungans, or the underwater cities of Mon Cala, the oceans were lit up with city lights. Not here in Kamino. The Kaminoans lived above the water, and therefore they didn't really need to have the ocean lit up. Luckily for Fisto, he so happened to be born from a water world. He had no issue getting down to the ocean floor and seeing everything he needed to see, and he also found those who were distressed. The few Kaminoans that were working down here were stuck and their oxygen levels were rather low. Kit Fisto found what was blocking off the ship and he looked at it. He realized that it was crushing the glass on the small Kaminoan pod. If he removed the material, it would open up the pod and cause it to flood, which would most likely cause the deaths of the 4 workers. Fisto thought for a moment as he looked back and forth, noticing the size of the material. Fisto took out his lightsaber and cut in half the first bottom piece of the ocean floor, and then the top half, which was hanging off the pod. He cut it off too, leaving a small bridge of material covering the cracked glass. Kit Fisto then wondered how he would be able to lift the pod. In concept, it was a great idea, but he was not physically strong enough to do this. He was only 13. He thought back to one of his oldest teachings from Master Yoda, that size matters not. Fisto closed his eyes and then reached his hands down under the pod and pushed up with the force, as a small pod slowly lifted off the ocean floor. Fisto was then able to grab a hold of the bottom as he pulled his second hand under and pushed up. His focus and determination allowed him to propel the pod up as he got the entire mass above his head and used his legs to press them off the surface. Fisto was a strong swimmer, and it showed as the pod began to pick up speed as it lifted up towards the surface of the massive, planet-wide ocean. Within minutes, Fisto was staring up and looking into the raindrops falling down. The people inside the pod crawled out of the damaged vehicle and found a ladder to climb back up to the main platform. Once the group of Kaminoans returned to Tapoka City, with Kit Fisto behind them, they thanked the young Jedi for his efforts to help him. Fisto simply smiled and then nodded as he headed back over and shuffled to his master. The 2 Jedi turned after bowing and walked back out to their shuttles, as Uriel asked his student what he wanted to say. Master Poof knew that Fisto wanted to say something, and he didn't need to hear anything from Fisto to know it. Kit told his master that he wanted to grow in a more physical strength. Master Poof asked what he meant. Kit Fisto told his master that he wanted to grow in physical strength as he believed it would be of assistance to others. Uriel in a way understood. He respected that Fisto wanted to grow in his strength, but it would also take him time for that physical strength to appear on Fisto. So, until that time, it would be best for Fisto to work on his physicality and connection to the Force. Fisto didn't quite understand, but his master explained it to him in ways that he would understand. He told his student that he should focus on his flexibility and develop his closeness to his physical build. He would be able to enable his future self to grow in physical strength when he wanted to build himself up physically. Of course, Master Poof knew that Fisto understood what he meant by connection to the Force, because it was something that Fisto was taught ever since he was brought to the temple. It was consistently present in Fisto's teachings. Regardless, the 2 were being dispatched across the galaxy once again. The council told Master Poof, while Kit Fisto was underwater, that they needed to get to the Gungan city on the far side of Naboo. It was a hidden city, but the Gungans had requested that the Jedi come assist them. When Fisto and Poof arrived, they were told of a Gungan who was being held as responsible for the death of a family, yet there were no weapons used. and no one knew which citizen it was. But the story made its way around the Gungan city, and it left a sour taste on many of the people's mouths. Many people were in fear of being the next victims, but with the 2 Jedi present on world, there was a level of calmness that came with them. The Jedi would stay on Naboo for an extended period of time. Fisto would learn the importance of patience and how to properly handle a Jedi investigation. Master Poof was extremely persistent on trying to get to the bottom of the mystery, and as the days turned to months, the 2 Jedi and the Gungans realized that this would be something that would never be solved. The killer was brilliant and smart enough to avoid leaving any evidence behind. For several years, Poof and Fisto would bounce off different worlds around the galaxy. Master Poof and Fisto grew as master and apprentice, and their bond was brilliant. Both of them were renowned throughout the Order, and it wasn't because Fisto was the chosen one. As Fisto grew into a young man, he turned his body into a machine, as he worked out tirelessly to perfect his physical build and his connection back to the Force. Before Fisto was ready to pass his trials, he and his master were dispatched to Mon Calamari. There was another border dispute going on between the Mon Cala and the Quarren. It started when the Quarren started picking on the Mon Cala, and the Mon Cala smacked back. It was more so a passive-aggressive dispute, but it required a middleman, and so the Jedi were called in to be that middleman. Because the Mon Cala was mostly underwater, Kit Fisto would be handling this mission on his own. While Kit Fisto was only 17 and 61 BBY, he was experienced enough to handle this situation, thanks to Master Poof. The dispute really wasn't all that complicated, it was just overly passive-aggressive. Because the nature of the dispute Fisto would be dragged into was an endless debate about tiny invisible lines the Quarren were drawing to take more power of the planet's politics. Essentially, it was a planet-wide version of gerrymandering, and Fisto wanted no part in it. But because he was a Jedi, and he was here to help, that's what he was going to do. He was going to help, which for Fisto meant encouraging a peaceful debate without arguing or calling out each other's petty slurs like fish face or tentacle neck. For Fisto, both of these civilizations were rather repulsive, and he couldn't wait to return to the temple so that he may finish his training and become a knight. While Fisto loved being around his master, he wanted nothing more than to be free from being a student. It was nothing personal, just being a 17-year-old and wanting to be free in his own way. The dispute on Mon Calamari would last about 2 weeks, and finally would conclude with no redrawn invisible lines and the Quarren and Mon Cala back to step 1. But on the bright side, it would end the dispute for about the next year, at least. Fisto, once done, told his master that he understood patience and having said patience for people, but sometimes they made it especially hard. Poof would just laugh and remind Fisto that humility of being a Jedi was having patience to help others. Fisto wrapped his arm around his master's shoulder as they walked side by side, and Fisto laughed with his master as he told him that he had to stop himself from laughing when they were calling each other fish faces. Poof looked down at his student with a grin, as Fisto spoke up mentioning how it was helping him keep his humility, as he laughed to himself. Poof jokingly pushed his student as he told him that he was certainly humal. Of course, to anyone, this would be terrible grammar and galactic common, but for Poof and Fisto, it was an inside joke, essentially them poking fun at one another. The two of them would return to Coruscant, where Master Poof would take Kit Fisto to the council chambers, where the room would go dark and all of a sudden it would be lit with 13 blades of all 13 council members. Kit Fisto was no longer going to be an apprentice, he was now a Jedi Knight. This was extremely profound of a moment for Kit Fisto. He was 17 and already a Jedi Knight. Most Jedi didn't become Knights until they were around the age of 21, averagely. So, Kit Fisto was extremely proud of himself in this moment, but he wanted to work harder and achieve what he was always destined to achieve. Kit Fisto would approach his master after the knighting ceremony and ask him what he thought about him teaching another student, or just becoming a Jedi Master. Yariel was optimistic about the idea, though he believed that Fisto was young and he should enjoy the pleasantries of being a knight, without the responsibilities of being a Jedi Master. And while Fisto knew this and agreed, he really wanted to teach. His eagerness to excel pushed him harder than anyone ever could. Yariel told his apprentice to meditate on it. If it was right for him, then the Force would surely guide him. Though other than that, Yariel's personal advice was for him to trust his gut. And with the six-pack that Fisto was packing, there was no reason for him not to trust his gut. A couple weeks would pass, where Fisto would regularly keep stay at the Jedi Temple. Eventually, he found his call to become a Jedi Master, and so he put in a request. The request would be filled within days, to which Fisto was given a human girl to train. She was 15, the normal age to become a Jedi Padawan. She was quiet and reserved as a student, and her name was Vangil Perlee. Fisto had a moment of realization when he first referred to him as Master. He felt confident up until that moment, because he realized he was 17 and she was 15. He was 2 years older than her, and he had the teacher. Part of him feared that she would see right through him and call him a fraud. Of course, Vangirl would never do that to him, but it was Fisto overthinking the situation. There wasn't anything wrong with that. Being a master was a hefty task for anyone, especially a 17-year-old. But Fisto had to figure out his lesson plan for Vangirl. For now, it would be very simple instruction, trying to learn and understand who each other was. The new master and apprentice duo would get themselves introduced and comfortable with one another after about a couple weeks. For Fisto, he felt something may be wrong, especially since he and his master bonded so quickly. But Fisto was forgetting, and he wasn't seeing the fact that he and Master Poof spent time before becoming Padawan and Master, and they were working with each other before they were anywhere near being teacher and student. While Fisto and Vangirl didn't have any interaction prior to this, during the 2-week period, Fisto would ask his former master what he should do regarding the teaching situation. Poof told his student to be patient. There is no reason to reuse anything and allow the natural bond to form. In a joking way, to teach her everything that Poof taught him. Fisto was gracious for the little lesson from his master as he calmed himself down and became more patient for the bond between teacher and student to grow. And it did. It got better and better, and there was no more tension. Fisto was a great duelist also by this point, and he was ready to train his student, though, for Fisto, he had a unique gift. He used Form 1, which at its heart was the most basic form of lightsaber combat. For Vangirl, her training would become very tame compared to what Fisto went through with Master Poof, and that wasn't her fault. Fisto was very prideful in her, and, in his own way, she did no wrong. There was nothing wrong with positivity, but being overly positive could cause an ego for a young Jedi to grow. Luckily, Master Poof would notice this from Fisto from time to time and call him out on it. Thanks to Master Poof, Fisto was able to change his teaching ways in a way that would benefit Vangirl the most. As the two developed themselves, Vangirl would take on Form 3, while Fisto would continue to train with his Form 1. It really benefited the both of them to train with the opposite forms. As for Vangirl's other training, Fisto knew he could force her onto Aqua Worlds. Sure, he could do that, but it wouldn't benefit her as much as it would training her on planets with land. So Fisto decided that he would utilize Corellia, Coruscant, and Ryloth as the main planets to visit with Vangirl. She was born from a core world, and Fisto thought it would be best to keep her around the core while introducing her to the Outer Rim at Ryloth. For years, Vangirl and Fisto would get along continuously. They had no conflict, and they had a great amount of mutual respect for one another. In 58 BBY, Fisto would be 20 and Vangirl would be 18, a year older than Fisto was when he became a knight. Fisto was worried it was something wrong with his training, but he then remembered that he had an accelerated growth as a student, and it was an abnormal age for him to become a knight when he did. Though Vangirl believed she was ready to become a knight, and Fisto did as well. The question is whether or not she'd pass her trials. Of course she would pass her trials. She was trained by Kit Fisto, and she would pass them with flying colors, with absolutely no issues, and becoming a Jedi Knight. While Fisto was surprising even himself, he was eager to teach again. Something was so exciting about being a teacher. The Jedi Council would also offer their chosen one a seat on the High Council, as one of their older members passed away. Fisto would take the seat and make it a lifelong seat, but the excitement to teach again brought Fisto back down to the lower levels of the Jedi Temple, where he would put in a request for another student. 7 years would pass. Fisto would have trained a second student all the way to knighthood, and Vangirl became a teacher herself. The Order hadn't seen much change, but the Jedi Council saw change with a new Master of the Order in the young Mace Windu. Mace was a fine addition to the Council. Behind Fisto, he was the youngest Council member allowed into the Council. Fisto, on the other hand, slowed down a bit. He relaxed. The energy of his early 20s caught up with him, and he finally let himself calm down. It was more of who he was at heart. The excitement of being a younger man had come and gone, and after training 2 students, he was ready to fulfill his role on the High Council. Fisto during the last 7 years would have tremendous growth, not just of the Force, but with a lightsaber as an individual. It was him maturing out of his younger days as he became a Jedi Master with a calm and strong presence. The growth was highly respected from others around the Council. Not that they didn't respect him before, but each of them seeing his growth as a student into a Master was truly impressive. Because of Fisto's continuous growth, the opposition power in the galaxy, the Sith, were in fear. Uncommon, but when one being was making such a presence in the Force, it caused a ruckus, and it even threw off the Sith. The Sith were currently operating out of Coruscant, and their missteps may have led the Jedi back to them. It was unintentional, but since Plagueis was such a prominent member of his society, he had the influence of the banks, and he may have accidentally, openly laundered money towards Palpatine. While this normally would be investigated by the Republic police authorities, the main bulk of the police authorities were in the lower levels of Coruscant, dealing with a riot and a group of pirates that were rummaging around through innocent civilians. While certainly more experienced Jedi were sent down to aid with the riots, a set of Jedi were also sent to investigate the case made against Hego Damask II. The Jedi were told to be discreet about it, and not to alert the banker to their investigation, essentially being told to go in and not confront him. To the Jedi, this felt a bit odd and out of place, but Dooku, Windu, and Fisto went together to investigate. The banker had a wealthy penthouse inside of the city's financial district. It was a great place for Hego to hide his Sith in fashion and in plain sight. The three Jedi were relatively close. Dooku and Windu were more friends than either were with Fisto, but he was with them on their mission. The three Jedi snuck into Hego's penthouse. They had a warrant with them in case they were discovered. The Jedi wouldn't have done this unless they had a warrant, but with the warrant they were protected by the Republic if Hego was innocent, and he caught the Jedi in the act. When the Jedi entered the residence, they heard a familiar noise. It was the sound of lightsabers dancing around. Windu looked back as Dooku and Fisto both grabbed their lightsabers, wearing precarious looks on their faces. The three continued to tiptoe around as they saw lightsabers swinging around in front of a hooded man. Windu pointed to the left and then to the right, as both Dooku and Fisto split up. The three of them were going to surround the Sith and then ambush them. Windu was being patient. He didn't want to rush this. Every step needed to be calculated here. Windu stepped up and around a pillar, as Fisto and Dooku flanked around the other sides. Everyone got into position as the three Jedi at the same time walked out and ignited their lightsabers, creating a fearsome trio. The young Zabrak turned around and looked at the Jedi Masters. The young Sith he was sparring with then removed his hood as he looked over at them with his silver and red hair. The man on the throne then stood up as he hissed. Windu, Dooku, and Fisto were not going to allow this little band of Sith to survive. Of course, it was obviously shocking that there were any Sith at all, but the Jedi were going to be cautious about their approach here. The Sith rallied around each other and formed a little circle as they faced down the encroaching Jedi. Windu lifted his blade up first as Maul looked at him. Sidious picked out Dooku, and Plagueis took his opponent on as Fisto. There was absolutely silence, other than the buzzing noise of the several blades. And then the silence was broken by the clashing of blades between Dooku and Sidious. The Dark Apprentice was hungry to kill a Jedi, as he swung violently. Dooku stepped back as he parried every strike with precise motion. Fisto, on the other hand, pushed an aggressive front against Plagueis. Windu moved in on the same pace with an aggressive attack against Maul. There was clear mismatch here, and the Sith were all mismatched 3-3. There was little chance for the Sith to pull out of this with victory, or even just escaping. The blades in the room lit up the skyline as they clashed in epic duel. Windu used a quick 3-point saber combo against Maul, and the strikes back to back were too much for the inexperienced Maul as he fell back and felt his life fall from his body, as Mace threw his blade through Maul's chest. Sidious turned to watch his assassin fall lifeless to the ground. Sidious kicked forward at Dooku, pushing the Jedi Master on the defense. Fisto pulled back as he and Plagueis fought in a massive fight. Windu pulled himself forward as he and Dooku double-teamed Sidious. The younger Sith was mobile and aggressive. He fought recklessly, like a Nexual let off a leash. Plagueis was much more reserved, but his ability to fight against the Form 1 duelist was putting him off guard. Sidious then pulled out a secondary weapon as he turned around and slapped the blade against Windu's blade. Dooku pushed forward as the two Jedi tried to finish off the Sith. Plagueis, on the other hand, swung violently forward as he stretched out his hand, trying to force push Fisto. The Jedi Master blocked the force push as he flipped forward, swinging his lightsaber carefully and with precise calculation. Plagueis was knocked off balance as he stumbled backwards. Fisto pushed forward as he smacked Plagueis' blade out of his hand and spun around and cut through the Sith Lord. Sidious didn't care as he continued to parry and block with the superior duelist like Dooku and Windu. As Windu collided with Sidious, and Dooku struck through the Sith apprentice, killing him. The three Jedi stared at each other. They didn't know what to do next, but they had to come up with an explanation why a popular senator and a banker were now dead. But the Jedi had a simple explanation. They were killed off by the mob for enacting in-credit laundering. It was a cover-up, but at the end of the day, it was a Sith. The Jedi could afford to cover it up for them. It was for the best of the galaxy. When the three returned to the Jedi Council after covering their tracks, they openly discussed everything they had discovered. They were able to take some Sith artifacts, as Mace addressed the Council on behalf of Fisto, Dooku, and himself. The proclaimed Chosen One spoke up. He apologized for interrupting Master Windu, but if the Sith were here, then they had been along for too long. If the Jedi wanted a real chance at stopping their evil stench, they would expend their order outside of the reach of the Republic. To most of the council members, this was a rambunctious idea, but it actually made a lot of sense to those present like Dooku, Windu, and Plo Koon. While Yoda was skeptical about dividing up his own order, it was a logical decision. If the order was more present in the galaxy, they could stop the Sith from returning. Because if Plagueis hadn't been that made the mistake, he wouldn't have been caught. And while he made the mistake, if the Coruscant police wasn't on high alert because of the riots, they would have never noticed the laundering. Regardless, the council would normally put it up to a vote, but Fisto spoke again, telling them if they didn't, he would take his own sect out into the Outer Rim, where the Sith homeworlds were, and build a portion of the Jedi Temple. Yoda looked across the room, and the entire room seemed a bit surprised by Fisto's quick action, especially since he'd been so calm since the end of his last student's training. Regardless, they decided to do this. It needed to be calculated. The Order could afford to move 1,000 members to 10 star systems. It would keep the Order spread out enough where they could have an interlocked network of productive functioning. If the Jedi followed this plan, then very well, they could make sure the Sith never returned again. On the other positive note, there would be more peace in the galaxy. With Jedi Guardians everywhere, the idea was quite brilliant, and it was surprising that the Jedi hadn't come up with this idea beforehand. While it was simple of an idea, it would take a lot to bring to life. The Jedi had that time to think through though. Within 10 years, the Order was entirely dispersed. The main temple, being the one on Coruscant, would still house the Grand Master and the Master of the Order. But the Order was so far spread out, 4 council members, including the Master and the Grand Master of the Order, would remain on Coruscant, while each of the other 9 would be spread out and take over a responsibility of their own sect of the Order. The 10 years since the death of the 3 Sith saw nothing but growth of peace. The Jedi were able to work against the crime families and outstretch their arms across the galaxy. The Jedi were also able to stop slavery in almost everywhere. The most productive Jedi were the ones who helped forge their new temples. The temple on Coruscant was great, but it was reserved for the elder members of the Order, ones with less mobility and more knowledge. It essentially became the hub of Jedi knowledge, while each of the other council members took up their own roles. Though with the Jedi so far spread out, there would be several reports of Jedi going missing or having their lightsabers be found without a trace of them. Most of this happened in the Mid-Rim, close to the Outer Rim. Kit Fisto and Quinlan Vos were being sent out to hunt and find out what was happening. It was also peculiar because Sifo Dyas and Count Dooku had gone missing as well. These two were some of the best buds in the Order, and both of them were very respectfully powerful. Sifo Dyas served on the Council, and he was the representative of the Council in this part of the galaxy, and Dooku was offered a seat on the Council once before, but he never took it. Kit Fisto had a hunch on where these cases were going, after studying a map of the near planets and how close they were to corresponding planets. Ironically, all the murdered Jedi or reported missing Jedi happened to be within a small jump away from Naboo. All the planets were surrounding the blue and green world, so it was wise to assume that Fisto and Vos should check out Naboo. Their journey was short, but when they arrived, they knew they were in the presence of pure evil. Quinlan never faced the Sith before, but Fisto had. He could feel the hate seething through the ground of the thick forested area. The two Jedi walked forward as they saw a massive swamp. Kit Fisto looked at Quinlan as the Jedi Master put his hand up, saying that he would not be going in there. Kit smiled as he jumped into the air and dove down into the thick swamp water. He swam down into the swamp. He had been there once before, back with his master, Yariel Poof. It had been a long time, and while the familiarity of the area was still present, there was something vile, truly evil down here. When Fisto arrived in the city, he saw it littered with dead bodies. Not a single Gungan visible was alive, all slaughtered by a lightsaber. There was also trails of blood, as if people had been dragged into the city and dragged around. Fisto followed the trail as he heard someone yell out, telling him that he didn't fear the dark side. The voice that spoke back was almost comedic. It sounded goofy and even friendly, but when Fisto turned the corner, he looked into the piercing yellow eyes of Darth Jar Jar. The Sith Lord felt Fisto's presence. The two looked at each other, the two most powerful beings in the galaxy, the two most powerful beings the galaxy had ever seen before, stood before one another. Fisto ignited his lightsaber as Jar Jar shot red lightning out of his fingertips. Fisto moved to the side as he reciprocated the attack by using the Force to throw energy back at the hateful energy of the Sith Lord. The red lightning vanished into thin air as Fisto smiled at Jar Jar. The Sith Lord ignited his lightsaber as he growled and then spun around and leapt at Fisto. The Jedi Master was smarter than this as he spun to the other side and parried a strike at him. Fisto saw that behind the Sith were several Jedi bodies hanging from the ceiling. Dripping from their hands was blood into a pool, and in the middle was a Sith altar. Whatever Jar Jar was doing wasn't going to be good. Luckily, Fisto got here just in time. Fisto noticed that Dooku and Sifo-Dyas were the two only still alive, as he blocked every powerful, fast strike that came his way. Fisto had to be on his best game. His opponent was more powerful than 3 Sith he fought with the other Jedi combined. This being was all-powerful, and it was matched up against the Chosen One, of good and evil. Jar Jar jumped up and landed behind Fisto, as Kit threw his arms behind himself and bent himself over backwards, as a lightsaber jab came for his stomach. Fisto kicked up and smacked the blade from the hand of the Sith Lord as he pulled himself back up and swung violently at Jar Jar. The Sith Lord used the Force to throw each of Fisto's strikes away as the blade slipped from his hand. The two then started going at each other, as it became a battle of fists, as Jar Jar and Fisto started throwing punches at one another. Fisto used his nimbleness to escape and throw his boot into Jar Jar's side. The Sith Lord tumbled back as Fisto pulled his lightsaber and swung around, cutting off Jar Jar's hand, as he then ripped the blade back out and cut through the Sith Lord. Kit didn't care as he ripped his lightsaber across the room, cutting down the two still alive Jedi as he reached out with the Force and caught them. Fisto ran over to make sure they were okay, which they were, for now, but for the most part, the biggest damage is their lack of blood from being dropped over a pool. This was an extremely damaging voyage for the few Jedi that survived. With the entire Gungan civilization being wiped from the planet, the Jedi would memorialize them and be forced to sink the city into the depths of the planet. It would be the final resting place of all the Gungans that were here, and the few unfortunate Jedi that ended up finding themselves and their final moments in the city. The Jedi Order would survive, and while it became slightly out of politics after the final Sith had been defeated, the Jedi would be forced to play the middleman between another dispute. But with the serving Jedi all around the galaxy itself would prosper. The Chosen One, Kit Fisto, would continue to help people, just so that he could smile with his shiny white teeth, and see people smile back at him. It made his job as a Jedi much more worth it. Being able to give so much back to the galaxy. A new era of High Republic would begin, and the Jedi would be the anchor to cement this new era in galactic history. And ladies and gentlemen, that is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, and Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this video. I got a special video for you guys next time. If you want to see it, what if, let me know. You know all that stuff already. And for the 50,000 subscriber special, subscribe and go down below, put your link or put your name on the link. I don't announce winners in the comment sections. I only announce them in videos, and we haven't hit 50,000 subscribers yet. So, no winners until we hit 50,000 subscribers. Let's talk about our story. Okay, I'll be honest. I've been all over the country in the last 2 days. I was in Los Angeles and then in Cincinnati, and I drove to Cincinnati. So this is like off of like little sleep, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually really happy with how it turned out because it could have been really bad. I think it's certainly out there, but from the get-go, I kind of knew where I wanted this story to go. I wanted Darth Jar Jar to kind of be the end villain, the big bad guy, and I wanted Kit Fisto to kind of have an interesting journey. Now, I looked for as long as I could. I couldn't find any information on Kit Fisto, so I kind of made everything up as I went. I figured he was about a middle-aged guy and Tolan for his age in the prequels, so I mean like 50 years old. I guess that's a third of his age, and I think that's where he probably was at that period in time of his life. So I was like, well, I might as well kind of just make it up as I go. So that's kind of what I did, and I gave him a whole backstory. I made him be trained by Yariel Poof because there's no information that I could find regarding his teacher. You guys could, you know, tell me that it's in a comic or something. I just happen to not read comics or the books, and that's just my personal preference. But that's something I would have missed if I didn't read them, or because I don't read them. But I looked for as long as I could to find the information, so I tried to make up as much as I could on the way. There's actually a lot of made-up characters in this story. The archivist, Cretin, Ram, is a made-up character. Cretin is obviously like a word referring to someone that's stupid, so that's kind of obvious there. And then Van Gil, she's made up as well. I like including made-up characters. You guys seem to like when I add new characters into the story, as long as I don't make them the focal point, which I'm perfectly content with. Other than our Anakin being never discovered video, that's certainly different. But regarding this, I do hope you guys enjoyed this. This one was a fun story, in my opinion. It certainly could have been longer. Again, I'm sorry. I was literally in Los Angeles. I came back and I drove 7 hours, and I drove 7 hours back. And I'm on 2 hours of sleep making this video, so it can get out to you guys by whatever time it comes out today. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.